Well, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that got up early. If you're on the West Coast, you're up really early. Some of you will be enjoying this, and I hope enjoying it by recording, but that's all good. And we'll move forward. And I'm sorry about the slightly provocative title. Let me see if I can handle the technology here. Yay. I think you guys can see that, and I'll be the little guy in the corner now. Good. But kicking heart disease in the ass, because it is time to get fired up about finally giving the title of the number one killer of men and women to some other disease. Obviously, I'd like it to be a different scenario where we just generally reduce the risk of chronic illness, disability, poor health span, and enjoy life. But since about 1918, the title every year goes to heart disease in the Western world. Sometimes we battle neck and neck with cancer. We're going to talk about that. But we need to stop that. And we've been very passive about heart disease. It's very interesting. You know, if you ask most people on the street, what do you think more people die of than anything else? You get a whole bunch of different answers. I'm going to show you some data on that in 1 second. But a lot of people will say heart disease. But if you ask them, do you have heart disease? Do you know if you have heart disease? Have you been screened for heart disease? Has your doctor talked to you about your risk of heart disease? Have you ever had any doctor talk to you that heart disease is like cancer and we have to get more aggressive like cancer screening? And most people will look at you like, what are you talking about? Why are you so angry? Well, I'm angry that we don't treat heart disease like we treat cancer. And we've got a lot of work to do on cancer. And we spend a lot of money on cancer. But I challenge you to think about your last visit to your primary care doc and whether kicking heart disease in the ass came up as a topic. So if you just very quickly, too much data here, and this is from, I think, 2016, but if you look what people are searching for on the biggest search engine, you know what it is, called Google. If you go over way to the left in the blue box, you'll see what people actually die from. 30.2%, it's heart disease, number one. Cancer just below, then road accidents, respiratory diseases, Alzheimer's, stroke, diabetes, and so forth. But if you look in the second column from the left, what do people search for in terms of causes of death? Cancer by far overshadows what people are looking for information on in terms of risk of death. And heart disease is that little tiny blue 2% at the top. And then people look at all kinds of other things like road accidents, way out of proportion to the actual risk. And if you go even further, media coverage, New York Times is the third column, and the English paper, The Guardian, is the fourth column. People are reading about terrorism, homicide, suicide as causes of death, almost to the exclusion of getting good, credible information about that tiny 2% that is what people are reading about, called heart disease. I have media alerts when articles come out, and there are underrepresented number of articles that people are reading on, the sites people go to, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, New York Post, and others. Heart disease gets overshadowed. So we need to kick heart disease in the rear and give up the title, number one. But it's still a problem. In 2019, around the world, still 1 out of every 3 deaths was a heart disease death. Some of that is heart attacks, some of that is strokes, some of that is aneurysms bursting. 18.5 million people a year, 51,000 people a day. That's worldwide. And you can see it's very important, but cancers worldwide are half of that. And then other conditions. Interesting data, but we don't talk about heart disease as a cancer, and heart disease is a cancer of the heart. When you looked in 2020, a year that had a special occurrence called the pandemic, even with all that was going on, with almost all 12 months being involved with people exposed to the pandemic, heart disease was still number one, cancer number two, and COVID, a very serious third cause of death in 2020. Fortunately, that has fallen off dramatically, COVID-19. But that was 2020. And when you get up to 2023, I used to tell people, if you look at the stopwatch to the left, that in the United States now, this isn't the world, one person every 39 seconds died of heart disease. But apparently, the clock is now one every 34 seconds, 2,500 deaths a day in the United States from heart disease. Clearly, number one. And stroke should never be ignored. It is a cardiovascular disease. It may be due to atrial fibrillation or blood clots in the heart or plaque in the carotid and brain arteries, and that's a little less frequent, one every 3 minutes. About 440 people a day have a stroke. So this is the enemy. We got to get fired up. I'm going to try and keep my energy high during this talk. And we have to have a department of kick-ass when it comes to heart disease. And in fact, I appoint all of you, everybody listening, live and recorded. You are now official representatives of the Department of Kick-Ass. We have to really get fired up. And it starts with you, the listener, knowing your heart condition risk and characteristics and specifics. And we're going to talk about that and how this has changed a lot. In my practice, I have a very vigorous practice. I see many new patients and return patients from all over the United States and sometimes from all over the world in my office in suburban Detroit, Michigan, either in person or by telemedicine. And I can tell you there is an unbelievable burden of heart disease that is unknown. It's the ostrich with its head in the sand, and we don't see the obvious. So I'm going to suggest to you an analogy. I'm going to try and carry this through the talk. But why don't we talk about heart as cancer? And this is a growing trend, actually, to talk about screening for heart disease like we screen for cancer. Think about it. You've been to the primary care doc, and they talk about mammograms. Maybe you go to a natural doc, they talk about thermograms for the breast. They talk about prostate screening. They talk about colon screening. They talk about cervical cancer screening. And if you've been a smoker, they'll talk about lung cancer screening. But when does your primary care doc say to you at age 45 to 50? And I'd argue 45. You know, Joe or Jane, we're going to take this big burden of heart disease on, and we're going to focus on you, and we're going to measure in you if we can detect any early signs of atherosclerosis. And I actually want to tell you, atherosclerosis, the first word is atheroma. And that's not a word you hear a lot, but it's one you hear in medicine. Atheroma, sometimes defined as like an oatmeal-like gruel, G-R-U-E-L, that is inside the artery obstructing it. But the original definition of atheroma was a tumor, because you basically have a tumor in your arteries if you have atherosclerosis, and it's spreading and spreading, and it metastasizes from one blood vessel to another, from one organ to another. But we don't talk about it that way. But I want you to think about heart disease as something we need to approach like cancer. We got to get that excited. You need to be screened for it. You need to be staged. You have stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 heart disease / cancer. And I'll show you how we do that now. It's advanced, but it's widely available. And we need to use chemotherapy, and broccoli is chemotherapy, and a treadmill is chemotherapy, but so are certain supplements like coenzyme Q10, and aged garlic is chemotherapy, and certainly some of the prescription drugs are chemotherapy. The only difference is, and I'll get moving from this slide in a second, is that there are some cancers that you can cut them out for isolated breast cancer, prostate cancer, for example, melanoma, or maybe you treat with chemotherapy like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and you're cured for life, and you ring the bell, and then you're 5, 10, 20, 25 years out, and you're in good shape. That's not the case with atherosclerosis. You may have had a stent, a bypass, a heart attack. It's going to be your whole life that this tumor is spreading and growing. And your whole life, you have to pay attention to your exquisite lifestyle, your lab values, your advanced imaging, and your chemotherapy that you use, whether it's broccoli sprouts or whether it's a low-dose statin. So I'll talk about. So Let's focus on heart disease. And I'm not here particularly to sell you books that I wrote, but this is the second book I wrote. It's been updated. Dead execs don't get bonuses. You can buy it online at the sellers. And its whole focus was to give people a guide, basically like a cancer guide. Like I'm thinking of Dr. Christy Funk, a very well-known plant-based breast surgeon in Los Angeles. She's got her breast guide. This is a heart guide, what to ask for, how to be screened, and how to start preventing this with an analogy that it's like a cancer.